The Shark Deck.
Jimmy Kimmel was joking about Donald Trump returning to campaigning. Hi, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. Kimmel called it the political equivalent of when Michael Jordan went to play for the Wizards. TampaBayDateNight.com. Asked Jim Gaffigan, hey, what inspired you to want to do comedy for a living? Jim said, I didn't even know it was an option. I mean, I've been doing it for 30 years. 30 years ago, it was not a realistic occupation. Let's see, 1992, Jerry Seinfeld might differ. I mean, there were people that could do it and make a living. Would it be hard to support a family? Most comedians with the rise of YouTube. Oh, do math, Johnny Mac. 1993. Most comedians with the rise of YouTube and satellite radio. You're welcome, Jim. You're welcome. You could have called us back when we asked you to do more specials, Jim. Most comedians with the rise of YouTube and satellite radio. Hi. Are you a new listener? Hi, I program the comedy channels at SiriusXM. When Jim was less famous, he would come up a lot. When Jim was famous, didn't return calls. Most comedians, with the rise of YouTube and satellite radio, it's transformed it to where now I'm performing in theaters, which makes it so much more. You can afford a family of 5 kids, which is amazing. You're welcome, Jim. You're very welcome. I'm not there anymore. Don't call those guys back. Hey, Jim, how do you balance being as successful and busy as you are with a family life? Gaffigan said, I think anyone doing a lot of parenting is always juggling. It's always reevaluating the situation and adjusting, luckily for me, I've been able to travel out with my kids. So I'll strategically plan tours around summer or Christmas or spring break so that some of it is being very tactical on how you do shows and bringing everyone with you. When they were really little, we used to be on bus tours. It was chaos, but it's definitely, like any parent will tell you, it's definitely a constant adjustment, right? This works this month, but next month, I don't know. Philadelphia Weekly, which has a really strong comedy section. They've been crushing it here in 2023. Donnell Rawlings was asked, how do you maintain the funny when you have to deal with things like COVID or social justice issues or Ukraine? Donnell said, some of the best comedy comes from a dark place. Some of the best things a comedian can create come from an argument with your spouse. It's all based on emotion. When the world's going the way it is now, that's when a comedian is truly tested. This is where we stand up. This is where we fight. When things are the roughest, who can rally and make people feel good about themselves? We're like therapists. And it's as if we are getting therapy because talking about all this helps us with our problems. We're laughing with you. We're engaged with you. It takes real engagement to make the negative into a positive. Many times when people go through issues, they believe they're doing it alone. Part of the show talks about me being an older dad, having my first kid later in life. I used to feel embarrassed to talk about that. Talking about it comedically helps stop that because I'm not the only one. Being out there doing your jokes and connecting with someone who can relate, that's awesome. Someone is always going through what you're going through. Julia Louis-Dreyfus told Variety there needs to be multiple years of normalcy in Washington before she would revisit Veep. She was asked how Veep would have dealt with something like the January 6th insurrection, and she said, I don't know how we could. I don't know how to make that funny, especially when people lost their lives. Eddie Murphy was out doing press for You People, and he told a great story about meeting Rodney Dangerfield. Eddie said, so I met Rodney. I'm 16, 17 years old, and I'm getting ready to go up on stage, and Rodney comes and he bumps me, and he goes, hey, you can't go up. Rodney's going on. So Rodney goes on, and he kills, and I'm like, I'm going to go up after Rodney. So no one wanted to go up, so I went up after him, and I do my stuff, and afterward, Rodney's like, hey, kid, where are you going with all that stuff, all that cursing and using that language? Basically, he told me I wasn't crap. So I was like, I was crestfallen. My mind was blown. I was like, Rodney didn't like me. He thought I was too dirty. Long story short, maybe 2-3 years later, I blew up. I'd become Eddie Hotshot. I was in the bathroom of Caesar's Palace at the urinal. Dangerfield comes and stands right next to me. I look over and he looks and he says, hey, who knew? DJ Demers finds comedic inspiration in everything, including poking fun at himself. He is deaf and said, I'm inspired by my day-to-day life. Whether it's a big idea or a small observation, I write it down in my notes and try to weave a coherent narrative over time. I definitely eased into my deaf material. I didn't want it to be some sort of crutch or gimmick when I started. It took about 6 months or a year before I started making jokes about my hearing aids on stage. By the way, after seeing this article, I checked out his stand-up. He is really, really funny. DJ Demers is who we're talking about here. He joked, I never felt deafer than I did during the pandemic. For real, man. Everybody had a mask on. He never realized how much he relied on lip reading until the pandemic hit. You can always expect good vibes at my show. First and foremost, his hour-long shows also feature an ASL interpreter. Dakota Ray Aber is a Dene comedian. I hope I got that right. D-E-N-E comedian from Meadow Lake, Saskatoon. She has released her special entitled, I'll Give You an Indian Act. She said the album was born out of anger at the government last summer. I was just very angry at the government. It happens a lot. I don't go to law school, so I can't change the laws that way. I'm not a big activist. I can't do anything that way. But you know what I can do is roast the ever-loving crap out of the government. So I got to work on compiling the jokes I'd already written, but then also going through the driest research that I've ever done for any comedy and put together this album. And so it's kind of like a big FU to the government. The Indian Act is a book of laws that dictates the lives of Indigenous peoples in Canada, and it's still in place. Some of the comments I would get was like, oh, we're still on this? She said, we're a first world country, I think, that has an entire book of laws dictating a race of people. From time to time, Variety will do, I'll call it a fluff job. They'll do these real puff pieces about people in the industry, and there's usually like some other reason that they do them. This one focused on Mike Berkowitz. He co-heads WME Agency's comedy group. He was talking about how things have changed. Mike said, it used to be we'd invite executives to see a set or arrange a blind pitch meeting. Now, thanks to social media, comics can build a following on their own. We're inviting executives to sold-out 3,000-seat venues where people are chanting your name. Variety pointed out some WME clients, Sam Morril and Chris DiStefano. Also spotlighted Theo Von, who has slowly become a touring and podcasting force over the past decade. He's now ready to go to market with his first feature film as a writer and star. And from MixOnline.com, they caught up with Anthony Leo. He runs Guerrilla Media, which is an AV production company specializing in the recording of comedy specials. That's cool. Leo says, we do albums, shoot comedy specials. We aim to be a supportive service for every stage of a comedian's career. Comedy recording isn't like capturing a room for music. He says you want to grab stereo pockets around the room where the crowd mics don't pick up too much of the comic's voice through the PA. If there's too much of the comic in the crowd mics, you can't raise the crowd level without also raising the comic's echo. That's why some comedy albums sound like they were recorded in a tunnel. The PA is almost your enemy. Amen. Comics get to select where their specials are shot because they know the venue and they know their audience. We have to find places to mount mics for good capture without showing up on camera. At a recent taping of Leanne Morgan, this at the Lexington Opera House in Lexington, Kentucky, one set of mics was placed above the highest balcony, angled down 60 degrees to pick up the seats clearly. To capture a wide crowd sound on the main floor, his team had to mount mics on the theater's ornamental columns. This guy knows what he's doing. Once placed, the mics had to be ready to go, and stopping the show to replace batteries was not an option. I could throw 2 lithium batteries in the Lectrosonics HMA plug-on transmitter. It'll run phantom power for almost 5 hours. That's fantastic, because we have to turn them on, make sure everything's good, and then they open the doors, seat the crowd, run the opening comics, do announcements, deal with various delays. I don't have to worry about losing a mic towards the end of the headliner's act when the crescendo's happening. Yeah, I remember back in the days at SiriusXM, I would get some albums that were just mixed terribly, and if you don't have the laughter there, it sounds like you're bombing. I don't care how good the material is, it just sounds bad. If you've ever heard a comedian do an audiobook, including George Carlin, without the laughs there, it just falls flat. It's kind of like me doing the late night jokes at the top of the podcast. It sucks. The Melbourne International Comedy Festival next month in Melbourne, Australia. Great city. Been there. Love it. Would love to get back. It's often ranked number 1 of best cities in the world, and I can see why. 600 plus shows. Starts March 29th, runs till April 23rd. There's a list of comedians here. I'm going to guess that I could read them all, but I'm going to guess that 99.9% of you won't recognize them, including me. Some of the international performers, let's see here. You may know Tim Key from the UK. Sarah Schaefer will be there. Danny Boy. Stephen K. Amos, he's great. Daniel Kitson. Some of the shows include Best of Comedy Zone Asia, featuring Malaysia's Douglas Lim with comedy friends from India and Indonesia. Love shows like that. Aboriginal Comedy All-Stars features a deadly lineup of First Nations comedians. Love shows like that. Neighborhood Sessions, 4 weekends of local comedians. Theme nights include 10 comedians for $10. Improv Throwdown. And Cab Original. That's funny. Come on, Melbourne people. Why don't you hook me up with a free trip? I'll run around with a portable recorder for 3 weeks. My wife will kill me, but I'll go. That's your comedy news for today. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your shows. See you tomorrow.
I'm Alyssa McKay, star of the new podcast, The Royals of Malibu. I play Ella, a sex worker just trying to survive when I get swept away to the wealth and the drama of Malibu.
You know, you can like something without touching it.
You've made the biggest mistake of your life, Ella Sinclair.
You are a total psycho!
Will Ella find a happily ever after ending? Or will these rich kids destroy her? Fall in love with The Royals of Malibu on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.